Last week, the defenses in my top 5 averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game and 9.4 inside my top 10, starting this week with the Minnesota Vikings getting a beautiful matchup against Dillon Gabriel, new starting rookie quarterback, and the Browns. We are the only people on YouTube putting this much effort and time into defenses, so make sure you do subscribe if you guys are new. I have the Vikings in the S tier here with a 7.6 point floor, which is very high, and a ceiling of over 15 points because the turnover potential is very, very high. Just like our number 2 defense here with the Lions getting a matchup against the Bengals, which is one of the most positive, again, in turnovers as well. The team has put up 10 and 3 points over the last 2 games with Jake Browning as a full starter. And looking in those stats with Jake Browning and the Bengals, if you look at his totals in those 2.5 real starts that he played, he is 8th already in sacks in the NFL with 7 in those 2.5 games and a total of 5 interceptions thrown. That is atrocious. The strengths with this Lions defense match up perfectly with the Bengals because they're 3rd in sacks this year, and they're also forcing a lot of turnovers, which do create fantasy points. Just like you will score and create a bunch of fantasy points if you keep coming back to this video and subscribe to the channel if you are not already, because we post this video every single week, consistently outperforming the consensus rankings, and we'll continue to do that by the Cardinals in this S tier against a great matchup in the Tennessee Titans, the number 1 best of week 5. The Titans are averaging 153 passing yards per game, and they are 1st in turnovers per play. Cam Ward is number 1 in sacks taken this year. In only 4 starting games, 17 sacks from Cam Ward. That is absolutely insane. That is going to give us a whole bunch of fantasy points, and why their floor is so high. The Cardinals defense as their own used their entire draft process to just upgrade their defense, allowing the 11th least total points to quarterbacks this year. But we do have a very big S tier here this week because the Browns also get a very positive matchup on the other side against the Minnesota Vikings. Carson Wentz so far in fantasy points has probably looked pretty decent, but looking into the underlying numbers, he is very boomer bust and not something we can continue to rely on. But you look at those 2 games that he started, they were cakewalk matchups, both of them against the Bengals and the Steelers defense, who number 1 are top 5 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, but also top 5 in just offensive success allowed per game. Now he's coming into, by far, the hardest matchup that he's played so far against the Cleveland Browns, who are 5th in allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. I will put a house on the fact that they will get at least 1 interception this game, and this team has a very high pressure rate on the quarterback. We know Myles Garrett is elite, and they really do, in my opinion, have the best defensive line in the league. Carson Wentz is not going to run away or escape from any type of pressure. He is too old. Expect a lot of sacks. And the Browns ceiling here is at 14.5 fantasy points this week with a really safe floor of 7.5. Dropping it down to the A tier though, guys, we are going to start with the Colts defense getting a great matchup against Mr. Turnover himself in Geno Smith, who now has more interceptions thrown than touchdowns with 7 in 4 games. If you don't want to end up like Geno Smith hurting your fantasy team every week, make sure you like this video because it helps me so much as a creator, but also it'll help the algorithm give you more videos like this to make sure you are ahead of everybody else. But the Colts are generating 1 interception per game so far this year. That is good for the defense 5 overall and allowing the 11th least amount of fantasy points and scoring points to opposing offenses this year. So strengths, they do match. And I have their ceiling over here at 11.5 fantasy points and a floor of 6.4. It is a little bit of a tougher matchup because the Raiders can generate offense unlike some of these other teams previously, but that's why they're ranked where they are here. Followed by the Bills getting a divisional matchup against the New England Patriots this week. Now, so far, to clarify here, the Bills defense is the worst internal unit that we've covered so far in this video on the list, but their matchup strengths do match with what they're dealing with here. Drake May does not pass deep. He's the quarterback 31 in deep balls attempted per game, and you look at the Bills, that is really where they do struggle in deep passes. So the Patriots also have a lot of turnover problems with all of their running backs. Drake May hasn't thrown a ton of interceptions, only 2 so far this year, but still an opportunity for the Bills defense to do good in a pass-first script expected from the Patriots. Just know their ceiling is high, but their floor is also very, very low, so they are coming with a good amount of risk. And speaking of turnovers being generated, the Saints are 100% a viable option this week against the Giants. It might seem absolutely crazy. They are even available on over 80% of people's waiver wire. So go check that right now if you haven't. Another reason, again, to like this video to make sure you keep getting them. But Dart does look like the right answer at quarterback for this team, and he did just beat the Chargers last week. But without Malik Neighbors in this offense and a very low pass volume expected offense from what we saw last week, The team is relatively one-dimensional, so the Saints defense, if you can stop Jackson Dart from running, it should be a solid option for them. And their defense specifically does get written off a lot more than they should be just because the team has no wins. But they get a good pressure rate on the quarterback. They have 2.8 sacks generated per game so far this year. That's number 7. They have a very high potential ceiling at 11.6 points because Jackson Dart has only had one real start. There's a very wide range of possibilities, but the floor is down at 5.8 points because maybe Jackson Dart is just that good and he doesn't need an elite talent in Malik Neighbors to score a ton of points. They can rely on Cam Scadaboo and I guess Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson, but that is yet to be seen. Just like the Houston Texans here, who jump up a ton in my rankings. I promise you guys, people do not update their defensive rankings as much and as clearly as I do. So again, I would love to have you guys on these videos, but without Lamar Jackson, this defense is getting bumped up. Now you can expect the Ravens to lean a lot more on the run game with Derrick Henry, with Justice Hill as well, but their projected team total of the week is lower at 18.5 points. This defense is allowing the least amount of points per game at 12.8 to opposing offenses, so they slow them down. They get a good pressure rate on the quarterback. They sack at a high clip, averaging 2.8 sacks per game. I have their ceiling up really high at 12.6 fantasy points, but their floor at 5.5 because we are dealing with Cooper Rush at quarterback, who last year in his starts with the Dallas Cowboys was honestly serviceable. His touchdown to interception ratio was decent. His passer rating was decent. Can he continue that with the Ravens, who arguably have worse weapons in Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Wallace? Probably not. It is a new team and a new situation, but we will see, which is exactly why they are ranked where they are here. Dropping it down another tier, though, it does start to get a little bit chippy because the matchups aren't necessarily as great, but the Seahawks is one of the best defenses this year, a great defensive unit. They just get a tough matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are going to miss Bucky Irving in this week's matchup, so the run game might struggle a little bit. Rashad White is not the most efficient running back. Sean Tucker will probably work in a little bit too, but nothing to really be worried about. What you do need to worry about from this defensive perspective is Baker Mayfield, is Emeka Egbuka, is Chris Godwin, who honestly is a lot to deal with from a defense. Luckily, this team is 5th in every single defensive stat that there is: points allowed, pressure rate, sacks, interceptions, everything. So there is sneaky upside here. And the ceiling for them because of that is up at 11.7 fantasy points, but their floor is just below 6, again, because of how good this team is. And we also get the Chiefs defense, one that we can start against the Jaguars, who haven't had a problem scoring the ball so far this year, but the Chiefs defense is good at stopping that. They are allowing the 7th least points to opposing quarterbacks and teams so far this year. Trevor Lawrence is also averaging 1 interception thrown per game. So the ceiling for this defense is over 11 points, because if we have a down game from Trevor Lawrence, or a down game from Brian Thomas Jr., or a down game from Travis Hunter, who we have seen all 3 of those things happen this year, it is a viable option. But the offensive talent is 100% there. If they are clicking in this game and can protect Trevor Lawrence, their floor is below 5 points for the fantasy point number. Dropping it down another tier here, though, we are going to start with these defenses that have a good amount of risk but can be put in your lineup with the upside potential, starting with the Eagles getting a very, very tough matchup against the Broncos. They do generate a ton of pressure and force a good amount of turnovers, but the Broncos offense is just that good. The Eagles, though, they have been on a tear, putting up 16 fantasy points against the Bucs last week and then 13 against the Rams. Both of those teams are very good offenses, so there is a potential they can still score points. I have their ceiling up at 10 points, but again, their floor down at 4.9 because the Broncos offense is definitely one to note and be considering, followed by the Giants, who are definitely a startable option here against the Saints. Again, their defense isn't necessarily top tier, but the matchup is good. Both sides of the ball really don't have anything that makes them stand out as far as fantasy points go, but the game total here combined is very low, and Rattler does get sacked at a pretty high clip. He has 9 in his 4 starts, 6th most in the NFL, along with the Ravens getting a matchup against the Texans. This internal defense is not very good. They allow a ton of fantasy points, but again, CJ Stroud in this offensive line has been struggling relatively. I do think CJ Stroud is a spot start quarterback if you do need it. Also, the Chargers against the Commanders and the Dolphins against the Panthers as your last option, but these defenses, a few here, are still available on your waiver wire and 100% can be started compared to these rankings that we just talked about. Your number 1 option here is going to be the Saints. Again, I have them ranked pretty high, and they're only rostered in 9% of leagues right now. They should be rostered in 100% because of that and their defensive matchup. Number 2, you're going to get the Texans here, who we just talked about, rostered in just about 50% of leagues. Top 10 option for me, they should be in 100% of leagues rostered. And number 3, the Chiefs, still available in 70% of leagues, getting a matchup against the Jaguars. And finally, the Dolphins against the Panthers if you need it as your last option. But that is going to finish out this video. Good luck with defenses this week. I will see you in the next video coming tomorrow, so don't miss that one. All glory to the man above.